A whale hunt by Anonymous. A tide of unusual height had carried the whale over a large bar of sand into the voe or creek in which he was now lying. So soon as he found the water ebbing, he became sensible of his danger and had made desperate efforts to get over the shallow water, where the waves broke on the bar, but hitherto he had rather injured than mended his condition, having got himself partly aground and lying therefore particularly exposed to the meditated attack. At this moment the enemy came down upon him. The front ranks consisted of the young and hardy, armed in the miscellaneous manner we have described, while to witness and animate their efforts, the young women and the elderly persons of both sexes took their place among the rocks which overhung the scene of action. As the boats had to double a little headland, ere they opened the mouth of the voe, those who came by land to the shores of the inlet had time to make the necessary reconnaissances upon the force and situation of the enemy, on whom they were about to commence a simultaneous attack by land and sea. This duty the stout-hearted and experienced general, for so the eudolor might be termed, would entrust to no eyes but his own, and indeed his external appearance and his sage conduct rendered him alike qualified for the command which he enjoyed. His gold-laced hat was exchanged for a bearskin cap. His suit of blue broadcloth, with its scarlet lining and loops and frogs of bullion, had given place to a red flannel jacket, with buttons of black horn, over which he wore a sealskin shirt curiously seamed and plaited on the bosom, such as are used by the Esquimaux and sometimes by the Greenland whale fishers. Sea boots of a formidable size completed his dress, and in his hand he held a large whaling knife, which he brandished, as if impatient to employ it in the operation of flinching the huge animal which lay before them, that is, the act of separating its flesh from its bones. Upon closer examination, however, he was obliged to confess that the sport to which he had conducted his friends, however much it corresponded with the magnificent scale of his hospitality, was likely to be attended with its own peculiar dangers and difficulties. The animal, upwards of 60 feet in length, was lying perfectly still in a deep part of the voe into which it had weltered, and where it seemed to await the return of tide, of which it was probably assured by instinct. A council of experienced harpooners was instantly called, and it was agreed that an effort should be made to noose the tail of this torpid leviathan by casting a cable around it, to be made fast by anchors to the shore, and thus to secure against his escape, in case the tide should make before they were able to dispatch him. 3 boats were destined to this delicate piece of service, one of which the eudolor himself proposed to command, while Cleveland and Merton were to direct the 2 others. This being decided, they sat down on the strand, waiting with impatience until the naval part of the force should arrive in the voe. It was during this interval that Triptolemus Yellowly, after measuring with his eyes the extraordinary size of the whale, observed that in his poor mind, a wane one with 6 ozen, 2, or with 60 ozen either, if they were the ozen of the country, could not drag sicken 3 a huge creature from the water, where it was now lying, to the sea beach. Trifling as this remark may seem to the reader, it was connected with a subject which always fired the blood of the old eudolor, who, glancing upon Triptolemus a quick and stern look, asked him what it signified, supposing 100 oxen could not drag the whale upon the beach. Mr. Yellowly, though not much liking the tone with which the question was put, felt that his dignity and his profit compelled him to answer as follows. Nay, sir, you know yourself, Master Magnus Troil, and every one knows that knows anything, that whales of sicken size as may not be masterfully dragged on shore by the instrumentality of one wane with 6 ozen, are the right and property of the admiral, who is at this time the same noble lord who is, moreover, chamberlain of these isles. And I tell you, Mr. Triptolemus Yellowly, said the eudolor, as I would tell your master if he were here, that every man who risks his life to bring that fish ashore shall have an equal and partition, according to our ancient and lovable Norse custom and wont. Nay, if there is so much as a woman looking on, that will but touch the cable, she will be partner with us. All shall share that lend a hand, and never a one else. So you, master factor, shall be busy as well as other folk, and think yourself lucky to share like other folk. Jump into that boat. For the boats had by this time pulled round the headland, And you, my lads, make way for the factor in the stern sheets. He shall be the first man this day that shall strike the fish." The 3 boats destined for this perilous service now approached the dark mass, which lay like an islet in the deepest part of the Vaux, and suffered them to approach without showing any sign of animation. Silently, and with such precaution as the extreme delicacy of the operation required, the intrepid adventurers, after the failure of their first attempt and the expenditure of considerable time, succeeded in casting a cable around the body of the torpid monster, and in carrying the ends of it ashore, when 100 hands were instantly employed in securing them. But ere this was accomplished, the tide began to make fast, and the Udoller informed his assistants that either the fish must be killed or at least greatly wounded ere the depth of water on the bar was sufficient to float him, or that he was not unlikely to escape from their joint prowess. "Wherefore," said he, "we must set to work, and the factor shall have the honor to make the first throw." The valiant Triptolemus caught the word, and it is necessary to say that the patience of the whale, in suffering himself to be noosed without resistance, had abated his terrors, and very much lowered the creature in his opinion. He protested the fish had no more wit, and scarcely more activity, than a black snail, and influenced by this undue contempt of the adversary, he waited neither for a farther signal, nor a better weapon, nor a more suitable position, but rising in his energy, hurled his grape with all his force against the unfortunate monster. The boats had not yet retreated from him to the distance necessary to ensure safety, when this injudicious commencement of the war took place. Magnus Troil, who had only jested with the factor, and had reserved the launching the first spear against the whale to some much more skillful hand, had just time to exclaim, "Mind yourselves, lads, or we are all stamped," when the monster, roused at once from inactivity by the blow of the factor's missile, blew, with a noise resembling the explosion of a steam engine, a huge shower of water into the air, and at the same time began to lash the waves with its tail in every direction. The boat in which Magnus presided received the shower of brine which the animal spouted aloft, and the adventurous Triptolemus, who had a full share of the immersion, was so much astonished and terrified by the consequences of his own valorous deed, that he tumbled backwards amongst the feet of the people, who, too busy to attend to him, were actively engaged in getting the boat into shoal water out of the whale's reach. Here he lay for some minutes, trampled on by the feet of the boatmen, until they lay on their oars to bail, when the Udoller ordered them to pull to shore, and land this spare hand, who had commenced the fishing so inauspiciously. While this was doing, the other boats had also pulled off to safer distance, and now, from these as well as from the shore, the unfortunate native of the deep was overwhelmed by all kinds of missiles. Harpoons and spears flew against him on all sides, guns were fired, and each various means of annoyance plied which could excite him to exhaust his strength in useless rage. When the animal found that he was locked in by shallows on all sides, and became sensible, at the same time, of the strain of the cable on his body, the convulsive efforts which he made to escape, accompanied with sounds resembling deep and loud groans, would have moved the compassion of all but a practiced whale fisher. The repeated showers which he spouted into the air began now to be mingled with blood, and the waves which surrounded him assumed the same crimson appearance. Meantime, the attempts of the assailants were redoubled, but Mordaunt, Merton, and Cleveland, in particular, exerted themselves to the uttermost, contending who should display most courage in approaching the monster, so tremendous in its agonies, and should inflict the most deep and deadly wounds upon its huge bulk. The contest seemed at last pretty well over, for although the animal continued from time to time to make frantic exertions for liberty, yet its strength appeared so much exhausted that, even with the assistance of the tide, which had now risen considerably, it was thought it could scarcely extricate itself. Magnus gave the signal to venture nearer to the whale, calling out at the same time, "Close in, lads. She is not half so mad now. The factor may look for a winter's oil for the 2 lamps at Havre. Pull close in, lads." Ere his orders could be obeyed, the other 2 boats had anticipated his purpose, and Mordaunt Merton, eager to distinguish himself above Cleveland, had with the whole strength he possessed plunged a half-pike into the body of the animal. But the Leviathan, like a nation whose resources appear totally exhausted by previous losses and calamities, collected his whole remaining force for an effort, which proved at once desperate and successful. The wound last received had probably reached through his external defenses of blubber and attained some very sensitive part of the system, for he roared loud as he sent to the sky a mingled sheet of brine and blood, and snapping the strong cable like a twig, overset Merton's boat with a blow of his tail, shot himself by a mighty effort over the bar, upon which the tide had now risen considerably, and made out to sea, carrying with him a whole grove of the implements which had been planted in his body, and leaving behind him, on the waters, a dark red trace of his course. Notes: one wagon,